Montana Territory, winter of 1873. The wind howled across the Blackfoot Valley like a living thing, hungry and merciless. Snow fell so thick it erased the boundaries between earth and sky, creating a world of blinding white. In this unforgiving wilderness, a woman named Sarah Mitchell trudged forward. Her daughter Emma clutched against her chest, their breaths coming in shallow clouds that disappeared instantly in the frigid air. Behind them, the doors of family had closed. Ahead, only the brutal emptiness of winter. Death seemed certain, until fate placed a Cheyenne hunter in their path. What happened next would challenge everything Sarah believed about survival, trust, and where we truly find our home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cold wasn't simply a condition of the air. It was a predator that stalked without rest, seeking any weakness, any opening to deliver its killing bite. Sarah Mitchell had been walking for hours, perhaps longer. Time had lost meaning in the endless white expanse. Each step required more effort than the last, as the snow reached past her knees. The supplies she'd hastily packed weighed heavily on her back, but it was the weight in her arms that concerned her most. Emma had grown too quiet. The 6-year-old had cried at first, her tears freezing on her cheeks as they were forced out into the storm. But now there was nothing, just the slight rise and fall of her chest beneath layers of inadequate clothing. Sarah adjusted her grip, pulling her daughter closer, pressing her lips against the child's forehead. Too cold. Far too cold. "Stay with me, sweet girl," she whispered, her voice breaking against the wind. "Just a little further." But the words rang hollow even as she spoke them. A little further to where? The nearest town was at least 2 days' journey in good weather. In this blizzard, with night approaching, they would never make it. Sarah had known that when she set out, but staying had not been an option, not after what her brother-in-law had done. The memory returned with painful clarity. The Mitchell family homestead had been warm once, filled with laughter and promise. Robert had built it with his own hands, talking endlessly of the legacy they would create together. But pneumonia cared nothing for dreams or promises. It had taken him in just 8 days, leaving Sarah and Emma alone with the harsh reality of frontier life. For 2 months, she had managed. The stored provisions had been enough, and she had learned much from Robert about maintaining the homestead. But when early winter storms damaged the roof and depleted their firewood faster than expected, she had no choice but to seek help from Robert's brother Daniel. The wooden walls of Daniel's cabin had seemed to press inward that night, the air thick with unspoken tension. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the rough-hewn table where Daniel sat across from her, his wife Martha standing rigid beside the hearth. "You can't stay here," Daniel had said, not meeting her eyes. "We barely have enough to get our own children through winter." Sarah had felt her chest tighten. "I don't ask for charity. I can work. I can teach your children and eat our food," Martha had cut in, her voice sharp. "Food we need. Please," Sarah had whispered, glancing toward Emma, who sat small and silent beside her. "Just until the worst of winter passes." Daniel had exchanged a look with his wife, something unspoken passing between them. Then he had stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "The homestead belongs to the family now. To me. Those are the laws out here." The truth had struck like a physical blow. This wasn't about food or space. It was about the land. Robert's land, their land. With Robert gone, Daniel saw his chance to claim it all. "You have until morning," he had said, turning away. "Take what you can carry." That night, Sarah had lain awake, Emma curled against her side, planning desperately. The nearest town was Eagles Crossing, where she might find work as a schoolteacher. But the journey would be dangerous, especially with winter settling in. Still, what choice did she have? They had left at first light, Daniel watching from the doorway, Martha's silhouette visible in the window. No one had offered a final word, a blessing for their journey. The door had closed with finality, the sound of the latch dropping into place like a judgment. Now, hours later, Sarah realized the terrible mistake she had made. The clear morning sky had been deceptive. By midday, clouds had gathered, and by early afternoon, the snow had begun. What had started as gentle flakes quickly transformed into a blinding squall, obscuring the trail and disorienting her completely. Emma stirred weakly in her arms, murmuring something inaudible. Sarah stopped, kneeling in the snow to better hear. Her daughter's words. "Mama," Emma whispered, her lips barely moving. "I'm so tired." Fear clutched at Sarah's heart. She knew what that meant. The cold was working its way inside, slowing Emma's blood, lulling her toward a sleep from which she would never wake. "No, Emma. You must stay awake," Sarah urged, her voice firm despite her terror. "Tell me again about the doll Papa made you last Christmas. Remember, with the yellow yarn hair?" Emma's eyes fluttered, struggling to focus. "Clara," she mumbled, "named her Clara." "That's right," Sarah encouraged, rising to her feet again, adjusting Emma in her arms. "Tell me more about Clara. What adventures does she have?" But Emma had fallen silent again, her head lolling against Sarah's shoulder. Panic surged through Sarah's veins, momentarily burning away the cold. She had to keep moving, had to find shelter, any shelter. She pushed forward, each step a battle against the deepening snow and her own exhaustion. The world around her had become a featureless void, the howling wind the only sound besides her labored breathing. The fading light warned of approaching night, of temperatures that would plummet beyond endurance. Sarah wasn't sure when she first noticed it, the strange sensation of being watched. Perhaps it was some primal instinct not yet dulled by cold and fatigue. She stopped, turning slowly, scanning the swirling white for any sign of movement. There, a shadow among shadows. Something large, moving with deliberate purpose through the blizzard. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as the shape drew closer. A wolf, a mountain lion. Whatever it was, it had surely sensed their vulnerability. She had nothing to defend herself with, no weapon beyond her own desperate will to protect her child. Sarah crouched, lowering Emma gently to the ground behind her, positioning herself as a human shield. If this was how it ended, she would face it standing. The shape emerged from the storm, massive gray-furred amber eyes fixed upon them with predatory focus. Not a wolf, but something similar, a wolf dog perhaps, wild and hungry. It stopped several yards away, head low, muscles tensed beneath its thick coat. Sarah remained perfectly still, her breath catching in her throat. The animal took another step forward, then another. She could see its ribs now, the lean hunger in its frame. It was starving, desperate, just like them. "Go away," she commanded, her voice stronger than she felt. "Leave us be." The wolf dog paused, ears swiveling forward at the sound of her voice. Then it bared its teeth, a low growl rumbling from deep in its chest. Sarah braced herself for the attack, for teeth and claws and pain. She would fight until her last breath, though she knew it would not be enough. The sharp crack of a rifle shot split the air. The wolf dog yelped, springing sideways, then bolting back into the swirling snow. It had not been hit. The shot had been a warning fired into the air. Sarah spun around, searching for the source of the gunfire. Through the veil of snow, a figure approached on foot, rifle held ready. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in layers of fur and leather. As the figure drew closer, Sarah could make out a man's face, partially obscured by a fur-lined hood. His features were sharp, his skin copper-toned, dark eyes assessing her with cautious intensity. He stopped several paces away, lowering his rifle slightly but not completely. He spoke, his voice deep and steady against the howling wind. "That was Grey Wolf. He is not your enemy, but he is hungry, as are many things in this storm. Sarah stared, trying to make sense of his presence. He was Native American, Cheyenne, by the look of his clothing and the distinctive pattern of the bag slung across his shoulder. She had heard stories of the Cheyenne people from settlers in the area, stories that ranged from respectful acknowledgement of their hunting skills to fearful tales of raids and violence. Before she could respond, Emma made a small sound behind her. The man's gaze shifted to the child, then back to Sarah. His expression remained inscrutable, but something in his eyes changed. "Your child will die in this cold," he stated plainly, "as will you." Sarah swallowed hard, gathering Emma back into her arms. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "We need help," she admitted, pride falling away in the face of her daughter's need. "Please." The man studied them for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "I am called Takoda," he said. "My cabin is not afar. You can shelter there until the storm passes." Sarah hesitated, weighing the unknown dangers of following this stranger against the certain death that awaited them in the blizzard. Emma's increasingly shallow breathing made the decision for her. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. This is my daughter, Emma." Takoda nodded again, then gestured for her to follow. "The child cannot walk in this. I will carry her." Sarah's arms tightened instinctively around Emma. Takoda seemed to understand her reluctance. "You are exhausted," he said simply. "You will fall, and then you both die." The brutal truth of his words could not be denied. Slowly, reluctantly, Sarah allowed him to take Emma from her arms. He lifted the child with surprising gentleness, cradling her against his chest and wrapping a portion of his fur cloak around her small form. "This way," he said, turning into the wind. "Stay close, the storm grows worse." Sarah followed, watching as her daughter's head rested against this stranger's shoulder. She had no choice but to trust him, no choice but to hope that his intentions were as straightforward as his words. They walked for what seemed like hours, but was perhaps only one. The terrain began to change, sloping upward, trees growing more densely around them, offering some slight shelter from the relentless wind. Sarah stumbled often, her legs numb with cold and fatigue, but each time she faltered, Takoda would stop and wait without comment. Finally, through the curtain of snow, Sarah glimpsed a structure, a cabin built into the side of a rocky slope, nearly invisible against its surroundings. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, dissipating quickly in the wind. A flicker of hope sparked within her chest at the promise of warmth. As they approached, Sarah noticed the unusual construction of the dwelling. The foundation and lower walls were built of stacked stone and timber in the settler style, but the roof was covered with hides stretched over a framework of bent poles, reminiscent of a Cheyenne lodge. It was neither fully native nor fully European, a blending of techniques that seemed to reflect its owner. Takoda pushed open the wooden door, ducking slightly to enter. Sarah followed, the sudden absence of wind momentarily disorienting. The interior was dim but blissfully warm, heated by a fire burning steadily in a stone hearth. The single room was modest but well-ordered. Furs and blankets covered a sleeping platform built against one wall. Various tools and weapons hung from pegs. Bundles of dried herbs and meat dangled from the rafters. Takoda moved directly to the sleeping area, laying Emma down gently and covering her with furs. He placed a hand briefly on her forehead, his expression grave. "She is too cold," he said, straightening. "Remove her wet clothing. There are dry hides there." He pointed to a stack of soft-looking furs near the bed. Sarah nodded, moving quickly to her daughter's side. Her fingers fumbled with the frozen buttons of Emma's coat, her own hands still numb from the cold. Takoda turned away, giving them privacy as he busied himself at the fire, adding wood and adjusting the stones surrounding it. As Sarah peeled away Emma's sodden layers, her concern deepened. Emma's skin was pale, her limbs limp. She stirred only slightly as Sarah wrapped her in the warm hides. "She needs heat," Sarah said, unable to keep the fear from her voice. Takoda approached, carrying a small clay pot he had retrieved from near the fire. "This will help," he said, offering it to Sarah, "a medicine of roots and herbs. It will warm her from within." Sarah hesitated, eyeing the steaming liquid suspiciously. Takoda seemed to read her thoughts. "It is not poison," he said flatly. "If I wished you harm, I would have left you to the storm." The logic was undeniable. Sarah took the pot, supporting Emma's head as she carefully helped her drink small sips of the bitter-smelling liquid. Emma grimaced but swallowed, her eyes remaining closed. "She must rest now," Takoda said, moving away to hang his wet outer clothing near the fire. "The medicine will work while she sleeps." Sarah remained beside Emma, stroking her daughter's hair, watching anxiously for any change. After a while, she noticed with relief that some color had returned to Emma's cheeks, and her breathing seemed stronger. Only then did Sarah become aware of her own condition, the violent shivering that had overtaken her body, the heavy wetness of her clothes, the painful tingling as feeling returned to her extremities. She tried to rise, intending to move closer to the fire, but her legs buckled beneath her. Takoda was suddenly there, his strong hands catching her before she fell. Without a word, he helped her to a sitting position near the hearth, then placed a pile of dry clothing beside her, simple garments of soft-tanned leather and wool. "Change," he instructed, turning his back to give her privacy. "Wet clothes will kill you even beside a fire." Sarah wanted to object, to maintain some semblance of propriety, but her body's desperate need for warmth overrode such concerns. She changed quickly, grateful for the dry clothing despite its unfamiliar style and slightly too large size. "Thank you," she said quietly when she had finished. Takoda nodded, but said nothing. He moved to a small table made of a split log, where he began preparing something, dried meat and what looked like wild onions and roots. His movements were efficient, practiced. Sarah watched him, trying to reconcile this man with the fearsome tales she had heard about native warriors. There was nothing threatening in his manner, nothing that suggested violence or cruelty. If anything, he seemed almost unnaturally calm, his actions deliberate and measured. "Why did you help us?" she asked finally, the question that had been burning in her mind since he first appeared. Takoda didn't look up from his task. "Would you prefer I had not?" "No, of course not. I just..." Sarah faltered. "Most men wouldn't stop for strangers in such weather. Especially not a white woman and her child?" Takoda finished for her, glancing up briefly. "Perhaps most men value their comfort over the lives of others. I do not." He returned to his work, using a knife to slice the dried meat into thin strips. After a moment, he spoke again, his voice matter-of-fact. "The storm came early this year. It caught many unprepared." He paused. "Why were you traveling with a child in such weather?" The pass to Eagle's Crossing would be dangerous even before the snow. Sarah's throat tightened. The simple question laid bare the desperate foolishness of her decision to leave without proper preparation. But beneath his words, she sensed no judgment, only curiosity. "We had no choice," she said quietly. "My husband died 3 months ago, his brother. He claimed our homestead, gave us 1 day to leave." Takoda's hand stilled momentarily. "Your own family turned you out, knowing what waited in the mountains." The disbelief in his voice mirrored Sarah's own lingering shock at Daniel's actions. "They're not," she began, then stopped herself. "Yes, they knew." Dakota was silent. For a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then he simply nodded and returned to his preparation of the food. "Rest," he said. "When the child wakes, she will need to eat." Sarah wanted to say more, to explain or perhaps defend her family's actions, though she couldn't imagine why. Instead, she drew the blanket Dakota had provided more tightly around her shoulders and watched the flames dance in the hearth, listening to the howling wind outside and the steady, reassuring sounds of Dakota moving about the cabin. For the first time since leaving the homestead that morning, Sarah allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. They would have died in that storm. This man, this stranger of a people she had been taught to fear, had saved their lives. Whatever came next, she owed him a debt she could never repay. Emma stirred on the sleeping platform, murmuring something in her sleep. Sarah moved to her daughter's side, touching her cheek gently. The skin was warmer now, no longer bearing that frightening chill. Relief washed over her, momentarily overwhelming everything else. "Thank you," she whispered again, not sure if Dakota could hear her over the storm. "Thank you for saving her." If he heard, he gave no sign. But as Sarah settled beside her daughter, drawing comfort from the steady rise and fall of Emma's chest, she thought she saw something soften in Dakota's profile, a slight easing of the vigilant tension he carried in his shoulders. Perhaps, beneath the cultural divide that separated them, he understood the one thing that transcended all barriers: a parent's love for their child. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but within the cabin's walls, Sarah allowed herself to surrender to exhaustion, knowing that for tonight at least, they were safe. The morning arrived with reluctant light filtering through the leather-covered window. Sarah woke disoriented, memories of the previous day flooding back in fragments. The blizzard, the wolf dog, Dakota. She sat up quickly, her eyes immediately seeking Emma. Her daughter lay beside her on the sleeping platform, still wrapped in furs, her breathing deep and even. The feverish pallor had left her cheeks, replaced by a healthy flush. Relief washed over Sarah like a physical sensation. "She is stronger today." Dakota's voice startled her. He sat on a low stool near the hearth, steam rising from a wooden cup in his hands. Sarah hadn't noticed him in the dim light of the cabin. "The fever. It broke during the night," he continued, rising to stir something in an iron pot suspended over the fire. "She will be hungry when she wakes." Sarah placed a gentle hand on Emma's forehead, confirming what Dakota had said. The unnatural heat had subsided. She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face, struck by how peaceful Emma looked in sleep, how untouched by the dangers they had faced. "I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice still rough from sleep. "She was so cold. How did she recover so quickly?" Dakota lifted the pot from its hook, pouring its contents into a clay bowl. "The medicine helps the body remember its strength," he said simply, as if this explained everything. He approached, offering the bowl to Sarah. "You should eat." The aroma of the stew rose to meet her, rich with unfamiliar herbs but undeniably appetizing. Sarah's stomach responded with a sharp pang of hunger. She accepted the bowl with murmured thanks, surprised by the intensity of her appetite. The stew was unlike anything she'd tasted before. Gamey meat mixed with roots and berries, flavored with pine, and something smoky she couldn't identify. As she ate, Sarah studied Dakota in the growing light. He moved about the cabin with purpose, gathering items, checking supplies. In the clearer morning light, she could better assess his appearance. He was perhaps in his 30s, his black hair worn longer than any white man's, but tied back neatly at his neck. His features were strong, high cheekbones, a straight nose, dark eyes that revealed little. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple wool shirt that appeared to be of trader origin. "The storm continues," he said, glancing toward the window where wind-driven snow occasionally gusted against the covering. "Not as fierce, But travel is still dangerous. Sarah set aside her empty bowl, the unspoken question hanging between them. How long would they need to impose on this man's hospitality? As if reading her thoughts, Takoda spoke again. You will stay until it is safe to travel. 3 days, perhaps more. It wasn't a question or even an offer. It was stated as plain fact, his tone brooking no argument. Sarah found herself both grateful for the certainty and uncomfortable with her lack of choice in the matter. We don't want to burden you, she said, though the thought of venturing back into the winter wilderness filled her with dread. Takoda gave her a long look. Is it pride that makes you speak of leaving when you know it means death? The bluntness of his words caught her off guard. Among her own people, such direct speech would be considered rude, even hostile. But Takoda's expression held no judgment, only a straightforward assessment of their situation. Not pride, Sarah answered after a moment. Gratitude. You've already done more than most would. Takoda returned to his task of sorting dried herbs, his hands moving with practiced precision. Most men would not turn family out to die in winter, yet here you are. The statement hung in the air, not accusatory, but unavoidable in its truth. Before Sarah could respond, a whimper came from the sleeping platform. Emma was stirring, her small face scrunching in confusion as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. Sarah moved quickly to her daughter's side. Mama! Emma's voice was small but clear, so much stronger than it had been the previous day. I'm here, sweetheart, Sarah soothed, gathering Emma into her arms. You're safe, we both are. Emma looked around the cabin with wide eyes, taking in the strange dwelling with the curiosity only a child could muster after such an ordeal. When her gaze landed on Takoda, she tensed, pressing closer to her mother. Who is he? She whispered, though not quietly enough to escape Takoda's hearing. His name is Takoda, Sarah explained gently. He helped us during the storm. He brought us to his home and made you well again. Emma studied the man with undisguised curiosity and lingering wariness. Takoda, for his part, made no move to approach or engage with the child. Instead, he continued his work, seemingly content to let Emma observe him from the safety of her mother's embrace. After a few moments, he picked up a small wooden bowl, filled with something that smelled sweet, and approached, stopping at a respectful distance. Children who are healing need strength, he said, addressing Emma directly for the first time. He held out the bowl. This is berry paste with honey. It will help. Emma looked to her mother for guidance. Sarah nodded encouragingly, and Emma tentatively accepted the offering, dipping a finger into the dark mixture and tasting it cautiously. Her eyes widened in surprised delight. It's good, she said, looking up at Takoda with the first hint of a smile. Takoda nodded, the severe lines of his face softening almost imperceptibly. There is more when you finish that. He returned to the hearth, leaving mother and daughter to share the sweet medicine. Sarah watched as Emma ate with increasing enthusiasm, color returning to her cheeks with each spoonful. Whatever Takoda had given her, it was working wonders on her daughter's recovery. How do you feel? Sarah asked softly, tucking a strand of hair behind Emma's ear. Better, Emma replied, scraping the last of the berry mixture from the bowl. But my feet still tingle funny. Sarah frowned, concerned about frostbite. She pulled back the furs to examine her daughter's feet. The skin was pink, but showed no signs of the blackening that indicated severe damage. Still, she worried. Her feet need care, Takoda said, approaching with a small clay pot. This will help with the pain and healing. Sarah hesitated, then nodded, taking the pot from him. Inside was a greenish salve that smelled of pine and something earthy. She applied it gently to Emma's feet, noting how her daughter's discomfort seemed to ease almost immediately. Thank you, Sarah said, looking up at Dakota. For all of this. Dakota accepted her gratitude with a slight inclination of his head. You should rest today, he said. Both of you. I must check my traps and gather more wood. He moved toward the door, pulling on a heavy fur coat and gathering his rifle. Grey Wolf will remain nearby. Do not fear him. He guards what I protect. Before Sarah could question this strange statement, Dakota had stepped outside, closing the door firmly against the winter air. Through the stillness that followed his departure, Sarah could have sworn she heard the low, whuffing sound of the wolf dog somewhere outside the cabin. Is he an Indian, Mama? Emma asked once they were alone, her voice carrying the innocent curiosity of childhood. Yes, Sarah answered carefully. He's Cheyenne. Emma's brow furrowed in thought. But Uncle Daniel said Indians were dangerous. He said they... Not all people are the same, Emma, Sarah interrupted, unwilling to let her brother-in-law's prejudices take root in her daughter's mind, especially not after what Dakota had done for them. Dakota saved our lives when your uncle turned us away. Remember that. Emma nodded slowly, absorbing this contradiction to what she had been told. After a moment, she asked, Will he let us stay, Mama? I don't want to go back into the snow. The question pierced Sarah's heart. No child should have to worry about shelter, about survival. She pulled Emma close, kissing the top of her head. We'll stay until the storm passes, she promised. After that, we'll figure out what comes next. But as she held her daughter, Sarah found herself wondering what exactly would come next. Eagle's Crossing suddenly seemed impossibly far away, and the prospects of finding work and lodging in a frontier town as a widowed woman with a child were daunting. She had sold her wedding ring months ago to buy supplies after Robert's death. There was precious little left to trade. The rest of the day passed in quiet recovery. Sarah explored the cabin cautiously, taking inventory of their surroundings. Dakota lived simply, but with remarkable organization. Every item seemed to have a specific place and purpose. Dried herbs hung from rafters in neat bundles. Hunting and fishing implements were arranged by size along one wall. Stored food, dried meat, roots, and berries was contained in tightly woven baskets stacked in a corner. What struck Sarah most was the curious blend of worlds evident in Dakota's possessions. Traditional native tools and crafts existed alongside items clearly obtained from white traders. An iron cooking pot, steel knives, even a few books stacked beside the sleeping platform. It spoke of a man who moved between cultures, taking what was useful from each. Emma remained on the sleeping platform for most of the day, drifting in and out of sleep as her body continued to heal. During her waking periods, she peppered Sarah with questions about their host, about the storm, about what would happen next. Sarah answered as honestly as she could, though many questions had no clear answers. By late afternoon, Sarah had grown restless. The cabin, while secure against the elements, felt confining after hours of inactivity. She wrapped herself in one of the spare fur cloaks hanging near the door and stepped outside, needing to feel fresh air on her face, even if only for a moment. The storm had indeed lessened, though snow still fell steadily. The world outside the cabin was transformed into a landscape of white curves and shadows. Trees stood as dark sentinels against the snow, their branches bowed under the weight of accumulation. The cabin itself was nestled against a rocky outcropping that sheltered it from the worst of the wind. As Sarah stood taking in the wild beauty, around her, movement caught her eye. At the edge of the small clearing, a grey shape materialized from the trees. The wolf dog, Grey Wolf, stood watching her, his amber eyes unblinking. Sarah froze, her heart accelerating despite Dakota's assurances. The animal made no move to approach. He simply observed, his breath creating small clouds in the cold air. After a long moment, he turned his head sharply, ears pricking forward. Sarah followed his gaze and saw Takoda emerging from the trees. On the opposite side of the clearing, carrying a bundle of firewood strapped to his back, Grey Wolf immediately moved toward his master, no longer interested in Sarah. The reunion between man and animal was subtle but affecting. Takoda acknowledged the wolf dog with a brief touch to his head, while Grey Wolf pressed momentarily against his leg before falling into step beside him. "You should be inside," Takoda said as he approached, his tone matter-of-fact rather than scolding. "I needed air," Sarah explained, wrapping the cloak more tightly around herself. "The storm seems to be easing." Takoda glanced at the sky, reading signs invisible to Sarah's untrained eye. "It will clear by tomorrow, but the snow is deep. Travel remains difficult." He moved past her toward the cabin, Grey Wolf following at his heels. Sarah hesitated before returning inside, taking one last breath of the crisp winter air. The vastness of the wilderness around them was both beautiful and terrifying in its indifference to human life. How easily they might have been swallowed by it, their lives ending unremarked and unmourned in the endless white. Inside the cabin, Emma's face lit up at the sight of Grey Wolf entering behind Takoda. The wolf dog paused just inside the door, shaking snow from his thick coat before settling near the hearth with the casual familiarity of routine. "A wolf!" Emma exclaimed, sitting up in her nest of furs, eyes wide with equal parts fear and fascination. "Wolf dog," Takoda corrected, unloading the firewood into a neat stack near the hearth. "Half wolf, half dog. He chooses to stay with me." Emma watched the animal with undisguised curiosity. "Does he bite?" "Only threats," Takoda answered, removing his heavy outer clothing. "He knows the difference between danger and fear." Grey Wolf yawned widely, displaying impressive teeth before settling his head on his paws, seemingly oblivious to the discussion about him. His casual posture and the way he blinked lazily at the fire undermined any sense of threat. "Can I touch him?" Emma asked, directing the question to Takoda rather than her mother. Sarah tensed, ready to object, but Takoda spoke first. "Not yet," he said. "Grey Wolf must decide you are friend, not stranger. It takes time." Emma nodded, accepting this answer with the seriousness of a child granted adult respect. "How will I know when he decides?" A ghost of a smile touched Takoda's lips, the first Sarah had seen. "He will tell you." The evening meal was simple but satisfying, more of the game stew, supplemented with a kind of flatbread Takoda prepared on hot stones near the fire. They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional sigh from Grey Wolf as he dozed. After eating, Takoda retrieved something from a leather bag hung on the wall, a small wooden carving tool and a piece of pine about the size of his palm. He settled near the fire and began to work the wood with practiced motions, small curls falling away under his blade. Emma watched, fascinated, gradually inching closer until she sat just a few feet away from him, her previous wariness seemingly forgotten in the face of this new curiosity. "What are you making?" she finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Takoda continued his work, his eyes never leaving the emerging shape under his knife. "A beaver," he answered, "the animal that builds, creates its own place in the river." Emma tilted her head, watching his hands move. "Like you built this cabin?" Takoda nodded. "Everything must have a place. The beaver knows this." The simple philosophy seemed to satisfy Emma, who continued to watch in rapt attention as the wooden figure took clearer shape. Sarah observed the interaction from her place near the sleeping platform, struck by how quickly her daughter had adapted to their strange circumstances, how readily children accepted new realities when treated with kindness. As the evening deepened into night, Emma's eyelids grew heavy despite her interest in the carving. Sarah guided her back to the sleeping platform, tucking the furs around her small form. Within minutes, Emma was asleep, her breathing deep and even. Sarah returned to the fire, where Dakota continued his carving in silence. For a while, she simply watched the hypnotic movement of his hands, the careful precision with which he worked. Then, gathering her courage, she spoke. "You live here alone," she said, making it half statement, half question. Dakota glanced up, briefly before returning to his work. "With Grey Wolf, but no family, no." Sarah hesitated, unsure of the proper terminology. "No people?" Dakota's hands stilled momentarily. "My people are 3 days' ride south in the sheltered valley. I visit when needed." "Why do you stay apart?" The question seemed to hang in the air between them. Dakota set aside his carving, studying Sarah with an intensity that made her want to look away. Yet she held his gaze, genuinely curious about this man who had saved them. "The world changes," he said finally. "Some embrace this change. Others fight it. I watch and learn. It is a path few understand." Sarah considered his words, sensing deeper currents beneath the simple explanation. "You were not always alone." It wasn't a question, but Dakota answered anyway. "No. Once I had a wife. Morning Star." His voice softened almost imperceptibly on the name. "Fever took her 4 winters ago. Our child with her." The disclosure came without self-pity, presented as simple fact. Yet Sarah felt the weight of it, recognized the shared experience of loss that connected them across the vast differences of their lives. "I'm sorry," she said softly, the words inadequate but sincere. Dakota nodded once in acknowledgement. "Your husband, how did he die?" "Pneumonia," Sarah answered, her throat tightening at the memory. "It happened so quickly. One day he was cutting firewood, the next he was coughing blood. 8 days later he was gone." "You loved him." "Yes." The simple affirmation brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away, unwilling to indulge in grief when they had been granted such unexpected reprieve. "Robert was a good man. He would have protected us if he'd lived." Dakota's expression darkened. "His brother dishonors his memory by what he did to you." The blunt assessment matched Sarah's own feeling so precisely that she found herself nodding in agreement before she could consider the propriety of criticizing family to a stranger. "Daniel always resented that Robert claimed the better land," she admitted. "I think he saw opportunity in our situation." "And now he has what he wanted," Dakota observed. "Land gained through suffering of others." "Yes," Sarah whispered, the injustice of it settling anew in her chest. Dakota returned to his carving, silent for several long moments. When he spoke again, his voice was measured, careful. "What will you do when the weather clears?" The question Sarah had been avoiding all day now demanded an answer. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Continue to Eagle's Crossing, I suppose. Find work if I can. I was a school teacher before I married Robert. Perhaps there's need for one." "Eagle's Crossing is changing," Dakota said. "The railroad brings many new people. Not all are good." The warning was subtle but clear. A widow with a young child would face dangers beyond simple poverty in a frontier town filling with railroad workers and opportunists. "I have few choices," Sarah said, unable to keep a note of bitterness from her voice. "Unless you know of a better alternative?" Dakota set down his carving, the small wooden beaver nearly complete in his hands. He studied it for a moment before offering it to Sarah. "The beaver does not leave when winter comes," he said as she accepted the carving. "It prepares, builds stronger, finds ways to survive where it is. Sarah turned the small figure in her hands, admiring the detail Takoda had achieved with his simple tools. The beaver sat upright, front paws held close to its chest, as if in contemplation. "Some of us don't have that option," she said softly. Takoda's dark eyes held hers. "There are always more options than we first see." Before Sarah could press him for clarification, he rose, adding wood to the fire and checking that the door was securely fastened against the night. The conversation, it seemed, was over for now. Later, as Sarah lay beside her sleeping daughter, the small wooden beaver clutched in her hand, she found herself wondering about Takoda's words. What options did he imagine existed for someone in her position? The homestead was lost to her, Eagle's Crossing uncertain at best. Yet something in his manner suggested he saw possibilities she could not yet envision. Outside, the wind had finally died down, the storm spending the last of its fury. In the newfound quiet, Sarah could hear the soft breathing of Emma beside her, the occasional crackle of the fire, and just at the edge of hearing, the low, rumbling snore of Grey Wolf from his place by the hearth. Strange how quickly the unfamiliar could become comforting, how safety could be found in the most unexpected circumstances. Sarah closed her eyes, the events of the past 2 days washing over her in waves of memory. Terror, exhaustion, relief, uncertainty. Yet beneath it all was a curious sense of suspended time, as if the blizzard had temporarily removed them from the normal flow of life, creating a space in which new possibilities might emerge. Tomorrow would bring clearer skies, decisions that could not be postponed. But for tonight, in the warm security of Takoda's cabin, Sarah allowed herself to simply be grateful for their survival, for the unexpected kindness of a stranger who owed them nothing, yet had given them everything. Morning arrived with startling brightness, sunlight reflecting off the snow and filtering through the leather-covered window in golden streams. Sarah woke to find Emma already up, sitting cross-legged on the floor near Grey Wolf, talking to the wolf dog in a soft, one-sided conversation. Grey Wolf lay with his head on his paws, watching the child with tolerant patience, neither encouraging nor discouraging her attention. "He likes stories," Emma explained when she noticed her mother was awake. "I told him about Clara, my doll, and about our old house, and about the time Papa showed me how to catch fish." Sarah smiled at her daughter's resilience. The easy way. Children adapted to new circumstances. "Does he now? And what does he think of your stories?" Emma considered this seriously. "He thinks they're interesting. His ears move when he's listening." Sarah glanced around the cabin, noticing Takoda's absence. "Where is Takoda?" "Outside," Emma replied, returning her attention to Grey Wolf. "He said to tell you there's food in the pot when you wake up." Sarah rose, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the morning chill. The fire had burned low overnight, but still provided enough warmth to keep the cabin comfortable. She ladled some of the porridge-like mixture from the pot hanging near the hearth, noting how different it was from the corn or wheat porridge she was accustomed to preparing. This was darker, nutty in flavor, likely made from wild grains and roots. As she ate, Sarah watched her daughter's careful interactions with Grey Wolf. Emma had moved slightly closer to the animal, but maintained the respectful distance Takoda had advised. She was showing the wolf dog something, the small wooden beaver Takoda had carved the night before. "Takoda made this," Emma was explaining seriously. "It's a beaver. They build houses in rivers. Do you ever catch beavers?" Grey Wolf's ears twitched forward at the sound of Takoda's name, but otherwise he remained impassive, his amber eyes watching the child with what almost seemed like consideration. The door opened, bringing a burst of cold air and blinding sunlight. Takoda entered, carrying several rabbits bound together by a leather thong. Snow clung to his shoulders and hair, sparkling in the light before melting in the cabin's warmth. "The storm has passed," he announced, hanging the rabbits on a hook near the door. But the snow is deep. Travel remains difficult. Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken extension of their stay. Truthfully, she felt relief rather than imposition. Emma was recovering well, but another day of rest would only strengthen her for the journey ahead. "Grey Wolf is listening to my stories," Emma informed Dakota solemnly. Dakota glanced at the wolf dog, something passing between man and animal that Sarah couldn't interpret. "He knows when words are true," he said to Emma. "Grey Wolf does not listen to lies." Emma nodded, as if this made perfect sense. "I only told him true stories." "Good." Dakota removed his outer clothing, hanging it near the door to dry. "The sun is strong today. It will begin to melt the top layer of snow. Tomorrow will be better for walking." Sarah understood the message. One more day of sanctuary, then they would need to move on. The knowledge settled uneasily in her stomach. "I'll help however I can today," she offered, wanting to repay some small portion of their debt. "Cooking, mending, whatever needs doing." Dakota considered this, then nodded. "The rabbits need skinning, the meat preparation." Sarah had helped Robert with such tasks often enough to feel confident in her abilities. "I can do that." The day fell into a rhythm of shared work, Dakota showing Sarah his methods for preparing and preserving the rabbit meat, Sarah adapting her own skills to his tools and techniques. Emma watched and occasionally helped with simpler tasks, her strength returning visibly with each passing hour. What struck Sarah most was the efficiency with which Dakota used every part of the animals he hunted. Nothing was wasted. Not the fur, not the bones, not even the organs that Sarah would have discarded without thought. It spoke of a deep respect for the resources the land provided, a careful husbanding that ensured survival through the harshest months. "You've lived here long," Sarah observed as they worked side by side, her hands busy with a rabbit skin, while Dakota prepared a preserving mixture of salt and herbs. "5 winters," he replied. "Before that, farther south with my people." "Why, did you leave them?" The question slipped out before Sarah could consider its propriety. Dakota's hands stilled momentarily. He seemed to consider the question, weighing what to share with this white woman who had so suddenly entered his life. "After Morning Star died, I walked alone for many days," he said finally. "When I stopped walking, I was here. The mountains spoke to me, said this was where I should be." He glanced at her, gauging her reaction to what might sound like superstition to settler ears. Sarah nodded, surprising herself with how easily she accepted his explanation. There was a straightforward honesty to Dakota that made even his more unusual statements feel grounded in truth. "And your people? They accepted your decision?" Chief Motivato understood. Others did not. Dakota resumed his work, his strong fingers expertly mixing the herbs. But a man must find his own path when grief walks beside him. Sarah felt a tightness in her throat. She understood that sentiment all too well, the need to find a new way forward when loss had destroyed the old one. "Did you build this cabin yourself?" she asked, changing the subject to something less weighted with emotion. "Yes, the first winter I used a cave in the rocks." He nodded toward the stone outcropping against which the cabin was built. "When spring came, I began gathering wood, stones. By next snow, I had walls." There was modest pride in his voice, the satisfaction of a man who had created shelter with his own hands. "It's well made," Sarah offered, and meant it. The cabin, though, simple, was solid and ingeniously constructed to withstand the mountain weather. "Robert would have admired your work." Something flickered in Dakota's eyes at the compliment, a brief softening. "Your husband? He built things?" "Our homestead." Sarah smiled at the memory, the pain of loss tempered by pride in what Robert had accomplished. He was always working on something, expanding the barn, building furniture. He wanted to add a proper schoolroom eventually for Emma and any other children we might have had. The last words emerged with unexpected emotion. Sarah busied herself with the rabbit skin, hiding the sudden brightness in her eyes. Takoda allowed her the moment of privacy, focusing on his own task. After a while, he spoke again, his voice matter of fact. The beams in this roof are pine from the east slope. Strong, but they bend in heavy snow instead of breaking. He pointed upward with his knife. Like people who survive grief. The simple metaphor struck Sarah with surprising force. She looked up at the carefully placed beams, seeing them with new eyes, not just as structural elements, but as a philosophy embodied in wood and skill. I've never thought of it that way, she admitted, but you're right, some people break under pressure, others bend and endure. You bend, Takoda said with quiet certainty. Your daughter is alive because you bend, but do not break. The unexpected praise warmed something inside Sarah that had been cold since the day Robert died. A belief in her own strength that had wavered in the face of hardship. Thank you, she said softly. They worked in companionable silence after that, the only sounds Emma's occasional questions to Grey Wolf, the scrape of Takoda's knife against bone, the soft rasping of Sarah's hands preparing the rabbit skins. It was strange how comfortable it felt. This shared activity with a man she had met only days before, a man from a world so different from her own that they should have had nothing in common. Yet in the simple tasks of survival, in the shared experience of loss, in the quiet appreciation of skill and strength, Sarah found unexpected common ground with Takoda. It was a connection built not on words or social conventions, but on something more fundamental, the human drive to persist, to protect, to find meaning even in hardship. By midday, the rabbits had been fully prepared, meat cut into strips for drying, skins cleaned and stretched on small frames, bones set aside for tools or broth. Takoda checked the leather window covering, noting the angle of sunlight. Good. And time to see outside, he said to Emma, who had been watching their work with increasing restlessness. The snow is beautiful in full sun. Emma's face lit up at the suggestion. Can we, Mama? Can we go outside? Sarah hesitated, glancing at her daughter's eager expression. After being confined indoors, fresh air would do them both good. Still, she worried about Emma's recovery. Just for a short while, she conceded, and you need to stay bundled up. Takoda retrieved a small fur-lined coat that looked as if it might have been made for a child, perhaps for the child he had lost. He offered it to Sarah without comment. She accepted it with a nod of thanks, helping Emma into it before wrapping, herself in the fur cloak she had used the previous day. Outside, the world had transformed. What had been a howling void of white during the blizzard was now a landscape of pristine beauty. The snow lay in gentle drifts, sparkling in the midday, sun-like fields of diamonds. The sky above stretched impossibly blue, not a cloud in sight. The mountains in the distance stood sharp and clear against the horizon, their slopes white with snow, their peaks touched with gold in the sunlight. Emma gasped in delight, her previous ordeal momentarily forgotten in the face of such beauty. It's like a fairy kingdom, she exclaimed, stepping carefully into the snow that reached halfway up her calves. Takoda watched her reaction with quiet appreciation. The Cheyenne called the first snowfall after a storm the world made new, he said. Everything old is covered. Everything begins again. The philosophy resonated with Sarah, who found herself seeing the landscape through new eyes, not as a dangerous obstacle, but as a canvas of possibility. Grey Wolf emerged from the cabin behind them, shaking himself vigorously before bounding into the snow with unexpected playfulness. He circled the clearing, nose to the ground, occasionally looking back at them as if inviting them to share his enthusiasm. Emma laughed at the wolf dog's antics, her face alight with joy that had been absent for too long. Takoda, noticing her delight, bent down and scooped up a handful of snow, compacting it between his palms. "Watch," he said to Emma, then whistled sharply. Grey Wolf froze, head up, attention focused on Takoda. With a swift, smooth motion, Takoda tossed the snowball high into the air. Grey Wolf tracked it with laser focus, then leapt, jaws snapping, shut around the snowball in midair. He landed with a soft whoomp in the deep snow, looking momentarily confused as the snowball dissolved in his mouth. Emma's laughter pealed out, bright and clear in the winter air. He caught it, but it disappeared. Takoda's face relaxed into something approaching a smile. Many hunts end this way. The prize vanishes when caught. The philosophical observation was lost on Emma, who was already gathering snow in her mittened hands, trying to form her own snowball. "Can I try? Will he catch mine too?" "If you throw it high enough," Takoda answered, showing her how to properly pack the snow. Sarah watched the unlikely scene unfold, her daughter playing with a wolf dog under the guidance of a Cheyenne hunter, all of them momentarily united in simple joy. How strange life could be, how unpredictable in its twists and turns. 3 days ago, she would never have imagined such a moment possible. For the next half hour, they remained outside, Emma throwing snowballs for Grey Wolf, while Takoda occasionally offered guidance. Sarah joined in eventually, her own laughter, joining Emma's when Grey Wolf performed a particularly impressive leap or looked comically bewildered when the snowball disintegrated in his mouth. It was only when Emma's cheeks grew too red from cold and exertion that Sarah insisted they return inside. The child protested, but obeyed, her steps dragging slightly as fatigue from her recent illness began to reassert itself. Back in the warmth of the cabin, Emma curled up on the sleeping platform, Grey Wolf surprisingly choosing to settle nearby rather than in his usual place by the hearth. The wolf dog's decision was not lost on Emma, who beamed with pride at this sign of acceptance. "He decided I'm his friend," she whispered to Sarah, remembering Takoda's words from the previous day. "So he did," Sarah agreed, tucking the furs around her daughter. "Rest now. You've had enough excitement for one day." Emma's eyelids were already drooping, the combination of fresh air, exercise, and her body's continued healing drawing her towards sleep. "Can we play in the snow again tomorrow?" she murmured. Sarah glanced toward Takoda, who was rekindling the fire. Tomorrow they should be leaving, continuing their journey to Eagle's Crossing as originally planned. Yet the thought brought no enthusiasm, only a hollow uncertainty. "We'll see," she answered, stroking Emma's hair until her breathing deepened into sleep. When Sarah joined Takoda by the fire, she found him focused on laying out various items on a woven mat. A small leather pouch, several metal needles of different sizes, sinew thread, pieces of shaped antler, and a few tools she didn't recognize. "What are you making?" she asked, settling across from him. "Moccasins," he replied, selecting a piece of soft tanned deerskin from a stack nearby. "Your boots are not good for deep snow. Too thin." He gestured to her worn leather boots, drying near the fire. "You will need better for traveling." The practical consideration touched Sarah. It was true. Her boots had been barely adequate before the storm and were now damaged by snow and cold. Yet the fact that Takoda was making new footwear for her suggested he expected their departure soon, confirming what she already knew must happen. "That's very kind," she said, watching as his hands began measuring the deerskin against an outline he'd drawn on a piece of birch bark, presumably sized to her foot. "But I have nothing to trade for them." Takoda gave her a look that managed to be both patient and mildly reproving. "Not everything is for trade." Sarah felt properly chastened. Of course, in his worldview, helping those in need wasn't a transaction but a duty, perhaps even an honor. Still, her settler upbringing made her uncomfortable receiving such gifts, without reciprocation. "At least let me help," she offered. "I know how to sew." Dakota considered this, then nodded, shifting the materials so she could access them more easily. "You can do the stitching here," he said, indicating the side seam of the pattern he'd drawn. "Small, tight stitches keep water out." Sarah took up the needle and sinew, grateful for something productive to do. The repetitive motion of sewing had always helped her think, and she had much to consider. As her fingers worked, her mind circled around the inevitable question of what came next. Eagle's Crossing had been her destination out of necessity, not desire. She knew no one there, had no guarantees of work or shelter. The town's reputation was mixed, growing rapidly due to the railroad, but bringing with it all the problems of frontier boomtowns. Rough men, makeshift housing, limited opportunities for women beyond cooking, cleaning, or companionship of the paid variety. Not the environment she had envisioned for raising Emma. Yet, what alternatives existed? Returning to the homestead was impossible. Daniel had made that abundantly clear. Her own family lived far to the east, a journey requiring money she didn't have. And remaining here, well, that wasn't an option either. Dakota's hospitality had limits, as did his supplies. "You are thinking hard," Dakota observed, interrupting her reverie. "I can hear it in your silence." Sarah smiled faintly at his perception, just wondering what awaits us in Eagle's Crossing. Dakota's hands continued their skilled manipulation of the leather, but his eyes lifted to study her face. "You do not want to go there." It wasn't a question. Sarah sighed, setting down her sewing for a moment. "Want has little to do with it. We need shelter, food, work. Eagle's Crossing is the nearest town." "Nearest is not always best," Dakota replied. He hesitated, then added, "There is another place. Smaller. 5 hours walk from here, to the south, River's Bend." Sarah's needle paused mid-stitch. River's Bend, I've never heard of it. Small settlement, mostly trappers, a few families. They have a trading post, some cabins. Dakota continued working as he spoke, his tone casual. "The woman who runs the trading post, Widow Larson, she is fair, honest, sometimes needs help with accounts, letters." Sarah felt a glimmer of hope stir in her chest. "You think she might hire me?" Dakota shrugged slightly. She complained last autumn about poor records, trouble reading shipment papers, said she needed someone who knows letters and numbers. He glanced up. "You were a teacher. You know these things." The possibility unfurled in Sarah's mind like a map to an unexpected destination. A smaller settlement might offer fewer opportunities, but also fewer dangers. A widow herself, this Mrs. Larson might be more sympathetic to Sarah's situation than the saloon owners and boarding house keepers of Eagle's Crossing. "How do you know this place? These people?" Sarah asked, curious. "About Dakota's connections to the settlement. I trade there. Furs, meat, medicines sometimes. They know me." He hesitated before adding, "They do not fear me like some whites do." The simple statement revealed volumes about Dakota's existence between worlds, trusted by some settlers, feared by others, fully belonging to neither. Sarah wondered what it cost him to maintain that precarious balance. "And you think they would accept us? A widow and child with nothing but the clothes on our backs?" Dakota's dark eyes met hers steadily. "Frontier people understand hardship. Not all are like your husband's brother." He returned to his work, adding, "River's Bend needs more children, more families, makes the place more permanent." Sarah considered his words, the unexpected possibility they presented. River's Bend sounded far more promising than Eagle's Crossing. smaller, more established as an actual community, rather than just a stopping point for the railroad, and if there was potential work suited to her skills. "Would you show us the way when the time comes to leave?" she asked, the decision forming even as she spoke. Takoda nodded once. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds. The trail is not difficult to follow, but there are places where deep snow hides the path." Relief and gratitude washed over Sarah. Not only had this man saved their lives and sheltered them, but he was now offering a path forward that held more promise than the one she had originally envisioned. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing the words were inadequate to express the depth of her appreciation. Takoda acknowledged her thanks with a slight inclination of his head, his focus returning to the moccasins taking shape under his skilled hands. Sarah resumed her stitching, her mind now occupied with new possibilities, hope replacing the dread that had accompanied thoughts of Eagle's Crossing. The remainder of the day passed in peaceful industry, Sarah helping with the moccasins, Takoda preparing provisions for their journey, Emma sleeping deeply as her body continued to heal. By evening, the new footwear was complete. Fur-lined moccasins with high wrappings that would keep snow from entering the tops, far superior to Sarah's damaged boots. After the evening meal, as Emma sat by the fire listening to Takoda explain how to read animal tracks in snow, Sarah slipped outside. The night had cleared completely, revealing a sky ablaze with stars, their light reflecting off the snow and creating a strange, ethereal luminosity that made shadows sharp and deep. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs with the crisp, cold air. For the first time since leaving the homestead, Sarah felt something like peace, not happiness, that was still too distant a prospect, but a calming of the desperate fear that had driven her for days. The sound of the door opening behind her broke her reverie. Takoda stepped out, immediately assessing her before determining she wasn't in distress. "The sky is good tonight," he said, looking upward. "The stars speak clearly." Sarah followed, his gaze to the brilliant constellations overhead. "What do they say?" Takoda considered the question with the seriousness he seemed to give all inquiries. That changes come in cycles like the moon. What seems like an ending may be a beginning, not yet recognized. The philosophy resonated with Sarah's own thoughts. She had been viewing their forced departure from the homestead as an ending, of security, of dreams, of the life she and Robert had planned. Perhaps it was time to see it differently. "Rivers bend," she said softly. "A new beginning?" "Perhaps." Takoda's voice held no false certainty, no empty reassurance, or another step on a longer journey. The stars do not promise specific outcomes. Sarah appreciated his honesty. Too many people offered hollow guarantees in the face of uncertainty. Takoda's willingness to acknowledge the unknown was strangely comforting. "Do the Cheyenne have a story about the stars?" she asked, genuinely curious about his worldview. Takoda gestured to a bright cluster overhead. "We call those the camp circle. They remind us that no one survives alone. Even when scattered, the people find ways to come together again." Sarah studied the stars he indicated, seeing them with new understanding. "I like that. It's hopeful. Hope is necessary for survival," Takoda said simply, "like water, like fire." They stood in silence for a few moments longer, the vast night sky stretching above them, the snow-covered world silent around them. Despite the cold, Sarah felt no urgency to return inside. There was something healing in this moment of stillness, of shared contemplation. "I should check on Emma," she said finally, reluctant to break the peace but aware of her responsibilities. Takoda nodded, turning toward the door. As they re-entered the cabin's warmth, Sarah was struck by how quickly this place had come to feel safe, almost like home, despite its alien nature to everything she had known before. Emma was still sitting where they had left her, now drowsily petting Grey Wolf, who had stretched out beside her. The wolf dog's eyes were half closed in contentment, his earlier wariness completely abandoned. "Look, Mama," Emma whispered as they entered. "He let me touch him." Sarah smiled at her daughter's delight. "I see that. He's decided you're a friend indeed." "Takoda said I'm gentle like the spring rain," Emma reported proudly. "That's why Grey Wolf trusts me." Sarah glanced at Takoda, touched by his kindness toward her daughter. He acknowledged, her look with a slight nod before moving to check the fire. "Time for real sleep now," Sarah told Emma, helping her back to the sleeping platform. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." "Are we leaving?" Emma asked, suddenly alert despite her drowsiness. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but not to Eagle's Crossing. Takoda knows of another place, River's Bend. It sounds like a nice settlement, with a trading post and families. He'll show us the way." Emma considered this, her small brow furrowed in thought. "Will they have other children there for me to play with?" "Perhaps," Sarah answered, unwilling to make promises she couldn't. We'll find out together." Emma nodded, accepting this. Then, with the direct simplicity of childhood, she asked, "Can Grey Wolf come with us?" Sarah glanced toward Takoda, who had paused in his work at the fire, clearly listening. "Grey Wolf belongs with Takoda," she explained gently. "This is their home." Emma's face fell slightly, but she nodded in understanding. "Will we ever see them again, after we go to River's Bend?" It was a question Sarah hadn't considered, though now it seemed obvious. River's Bend was only 5 hours away by Takoda's estimation, not an insurmountable distance. Before she could respond, Takoda spoke from his place by the hearth. "The trading season begins when the snow melts. I bring furs, meat to River's Bend then." Emma brightened immediately. "So we'll see you in the spring?" Takoda nodded solemnly. "When the first flowers appear, I will come." The promise seemed to satisfy Emma, who snuggled down beneath the furs, her worries eased. "Good night, Mama. Good night, Takoda. Good night, Grey Wolf," she recited before closing her eyes. Sarah tucked the covers around her daughter, then returned to the fire where Takoda was now arranging various items on a hide, provisions for their journey tomorrow. She knelt beside him, examining what he had gathered: dried meat, a small pouch of parched corn, a water skin, a few strips of some kind of root she didn't recognize. "You're giving us your food," she said quietly, the generosity humbling her. Once again, "Enough for the journey," Takoda replied practically. "River's Bend has supplies. You will not go hungry." Sarah nodded, accepting his assurance. "How will we repay you for all of this?" Takoda looked up from his task, his expression serious. "By living well, by teaching your daughter to see people for who they are, not what they appear to be." He returned to his work, adding, "That is payment enough." The simplicity and depth of his request struck Sarah deeply. No money, no goods, no service, just a commitment to carry forward the same open-minded humanity he had shown them. "I can promise that," she said softly. "Emma already sees more clearly than many adults I know." Takoda nodded, seemingly satisfied. Children often do, until they are taught otherwise. They worked together to finish the preparations, Sarah following Takoda's direction in packing the items efficiently into a small hide bag he provided. When everything was ready for the morning departure, they sat in companionable silence by the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself studying Takoda's profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows as he gazed into the flames. He was not handsome in the conventional sense that white women might judge, but there was a compelling strength and dignity in his features, a steadiness that inspired trust. "What will you do after we're gone?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Return to your trapping." "For a time," Takoda answered. "Then, when the moon is full again, I will visit my people. Help prepare for the spring ceremony. You maintain ties with your tribe, even living apart." "They are still my people," he said simply. "Distance does not change this." Sarah envied the certainty of his connection. Her own ties had proved far more fragile, severed by death, betrayal, and the harsh realities of frontier life. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Living alone like this, between worlds?" Takoda considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Sometimes," he admitted. "When the winter nights are long, when memories are too loud." He poked at the fire, sending sparks upward. "But this is my path now. Each person must walk the trail that speaks to their spirit." There was wisdom in his words, Sarah realized, a quiet acceptance of life's complexities that neither denied pain nor surrendered to it. She wondered if she might someday achieve such balance in her own heart. "I hope River's Bend is where we're meant to be," she said softly, "where Emma can grow up safely." "You will know," Takoda assured her. "The right place speaks to you, like the mountain spoke to me." He glanced at her, the firelight catching in his dark eyes. "Listen, and you will hear." The conversation drifted into silence once more, but it was a comfortable quiet, the peaceful companionship of two people who had briefly shared a path and found unexpected understanding along the way. Later, as Sarah lay beside the sleeping Emma, listening to the soft sounds of the cabin at night, the occasional crack of the fire, Grey Wolf's deep breathing, Takoda shifting on his pallet near the hearth, she found herself oddly reluctant to face the morning, not from fear of what lay ahead, but from an unexpected sense of belonging in this strange refuge. In just 3 days, Takoda's cabin had become a place of safety, of healing, of human connection that transcended differences, of culture and experience. Tomorrow, they would leave it behind, continuing on a journey with no certain destination. Yet Sarah felt stronger for having passed through this unexpected sanctuary, more prepared to face whatever awaited them at River's Bend. Outside, an owl called into the night, its voice carrying clearly through the still air. From his place, by the hearth, Grey Wolf lifted his head momentarily, ears pricked forward, before settling back into sleep. The rhythm of the wild continued around them, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow reassuring in its constancy. Sarah closed her eyes, surrendering to sleep with more peace than she had known since Robert's death. Whatever tomorrow brought, they had survived the worst. They had found kindness in a stranger, strength in themselves, and hope in the promise of a new beginning. For tonight, that was enough. Morning arrived with the soft grey light of dawn filtering through the cabin's window covering. Sarah woke to find Takoda already up, moving quietly about the cabin, preparing for their departure. Grey Wolf was nowhere to be seen, presumably outside hunting or patrolling the perimeter of Takoda's domain. Emma still slept soundly, her face peaceful in repose. Sarah watched her daughter for a moment, heart full of fierce love and determination. Everything she did now was for Emma. Every decision, every sacrifice, every risk. The responsibility was enormous, but no longer felt crushing, as it had during those desperate hours in the blizzard. "Let her sleep while we prepare," Takoda said softly, noticing Sarah was awake. "The journey will tire her." Sarah nodded, rising carefully to avoid disturbing Emma. She helped Takoda finish the preparations, packing the remaining provisions, filling the water skin, laying out the new moccasins and warm clothing they would need for travel. By the time grey dawn had brightened to full morning, everything was ready. Sarah gently woke Emma, helping her dress warmly in layers of clothing, some borrowed from Takoda's supplies. "Are we leaving now?" Emma asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Yes, sweetheart, Sarah confirmed. Dakota will show us the way to River's Bend. Emma nodded, automatically reaching for her wooden beaver carving, which she had kept close since Dakota gave it to her. She looked around the cabin, her expression growing concerned. Where's Grey Wolf? Did he already leave? As if summoned by her question, the door opened, and Grey Wolf padded in, snow clinging to his fur. He shook himself, then approached Emma, nudging her hand with his nose in an uncharacteristic gesture of affection. Emma's face lit up. He came to say goodbye. Sarah smiled at her daughter's delight, touched by the bond that had formed between child and wolf dog in such a short time. Yes, it seems he did. Dakota watched the interaction with quiet approval. Grey Wolf knows who has a good heart, he said, gathering the last of their supplies. He will remember you. When everything was ready, they stood at the cabin door, the moment of departure finally at hand. Sarah turned to Dakota, struggling to find words adequate to express her gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, she began. For our lives, for your kindness, for everything. Dakota shook his head slightly. No thanks needed between people who have shared fire and food. He handed her a small bundle wrapped in hide. Medicine for the child if the cough returns. Brew it like tea, not too strong. Sarah accepted the gift, adding it carefully to their pack. I'll remember. Dakota nodded, then opened the door. The world outside was transformed from the previous day, still snow-covered but no longer blindingly bright. Clouds had moved in overnight, softening the light and promising more snow by evening. We should go, Dakota said, surveying the sky. Much ground to cover before the weather turns again. They set out, Dakota leading the way, Sarah and Emma, following in his tracks through the deep snow. Grey Wolf accompanied them, sometimes ranging ahead, sometimes circling back, his movements purposeful and vigilant. The journey was slow but steady. Dakota set a pace that Emma could maintain, stopping occasionally to allow the child to rest. He chose the easiest path through the snow-covered terrain, avoiding drifts and finding natural shelters when the wind picked up. As they traveled, Dakota pointed out features of the landscape, teaching Emma to recognize markers that might guide her if she ever needed to find her way alone. Sarah listened as well, appreciating both the practical knowledge and the way he engaged her daughter, treating Emma's questions with the same seriousness he would give an adult's. The mountains there, he said, indicating a distinctive formation. To the west, the Cheyenne call them sleeping warriors because of their shape. If you keep them on your left while traveling south, you will not become lost. Emma studied the mountains intently, committing their outline to memory. They do look like people lying down, she observed, with faces looking up at the sky. Dakota nodded, pleased by her perception. Many answers are written in the land, if you learn to read them. The morning passed this way, a journey that was also a lesson in survival, in seeing the world through new eyes. Despite the cold and the physical effort of walking through snow, Sarah found herself enjoying the experience, the pristine beauty of the wilderness, the growing confidence in Emma's steps, the silent companionship of their unlikely guide. By midday, they stopped in a small clearing sheltered by towering pines. Dakota brushed away snow from a fallen log, creating a place for Emma to sit while he unpacked some of the provisions. Eat, he said, offering dried meat and a handful of parched corn. The body needs fuel in cold weather. They ate in companionable silence, the forest quiet around them, save for the occasional soft plop of snow falling from overburdened branches. Grey Wolf patrolled the perimeter of their resting place, occasionally disappearing among the trees, only to reappear minutes later from an unexpected direction. How much farther to River's Bend? Sarah asked as they finished their simple meal. Dakota glanced at the sky, gauging the sun's position behind the clouds. 3 hours more. We will arrive before dark. Emma, who had been watching Grey Wolf's movements with fascination, suddenly asked, "Will there be other children for me to play with? In River's Bend?" "Yes," Dakota answered with unusual certainty. "The blacksmith has 2 daughters. The trapper, who lives near the creek, has a son about your age." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "You know the families well." Dakota shrugged slightly. "I observe. Children are important to know. They become the adults who decide if I am welcome or feared." The simple statement revealed so much about Dakota's precarious position, his awareness that today's children would shape tomorrow's attitudes toward native peoples. It was a long-term view that spoke to both wisdom and resignation. "The children in River's Bend," he continued, "they wave to me when I come, not hide behind their mothers." There was a hint of satisfaction in his voice, as if this small acceptance was a victory worth noting. After a short rest, they resumed their journey. The terrain began to change subtly, the forest thinning, the land sloping gradually downward. Occasionally, Dakota pointed out traces of wildlife, deer tracks crossing their path, the distinctive mark of a fox's passage, the distant silhouette of a hawk circling above the trees. As the afternoon progressed, Emma began to tire. Though she tried to hide it, her steps grew slower, her breathing more labored. Sarah was about to suggest another rest when Dakota stopped, crouching down to Emma's level. "The journey is long for small legs," he said matter-of-factly. "Would you ride on my shoulders for a while?" Emma's face brightened at the offer, though. She glanced at Sarah for permission. Sarah nodded, grateful for Dakota's sensitivity to her daughter's needs. With careful movements, Dakota helped Emma onto his shoulders, his strong hands securing her safely. "Now you are tall as the trees," he told her, resuming their path with Emma giggling softly at her new perspective. Sarah walked beside them, struck by the image they presented, the Cheyenne hunter carrying her daughter with such natural ease, as if he had done so 100 times before. Perhaps he had, with his own child, in a life now lost to him. The thought brought a pang of shared sorrow. They continued this way for nearly an hour, Dakota pointing out features of the landscape to Emma, who delighted in her elevated view of the world. When they crested a small rise, he stopped, indicating the valley below with a slight nod. "River's Bend," he said simply. Sarah stepped forward eagerly, taking in the sight. Unlike the crude boomtowns sprouting up along the railroad, River's Bend had the settled look of a community that had taken root with intention. A dozen or so buildings clustered near a bend in the river that gave the settlement its name. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance, Sarah could make out figures moving between buildings, people going about their daily business despite the winter conditions. "It's bigger than I expected," she admitted, relief evident in her voice. A real settlement meant real opportunities, real hope for starting over. "Grew this past year," Dakota explained. "New families came when the railroad chose another route. People who wanted quiet, not noise." That suited Sarah perfectly. She had no desire for the rough hurly-burly of rapidly expanding railroad towns, with their saloons and brothels often outnumbering family dwellings. Dakota helped Emma down from his shoulders, and they began the final leg of their journey, the descent into the valley where River's Bend awaited. As they drew closer, details became clearer. The buildings were sturdy log structures built to withstand harsh winters. The trading post occupied the largest building near the center of the settlement, with a porch running along its front and a sign swinging gently in the breeze. Other structures included what appeared to be a blacksmith shop, identified by its stone chimney and adjacent forge shelter. Several family dwellings of varying sizes, a small stable, and a building slightly apart from the others that Sarah guessed might be a schoolhouse or meeting hall. People moved purposefully about the settlement, wrapped against the cold, but seemingly undeterred by winter conditions. A few children were visible, engaged in clearing snow from pathways between buildings under adult supervision. As they approached the outskirts of the settlement, Grey Wolf suddenly stopped, sitting down in the snow with clear intention. He would go no further. Grey Wolf stays at the edge of towns, Takoda explained when Emma looked back questioningly. Too many people make him nervous. Will he be all right alone? Emma asked, concerned. He is never truly alone, Takoda assured her. He will find his way back to the cabin or wait for my return. With a last look at the wolf dog, they continued toward the settlement. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety as they drew closer. How would they be received? A widowed mother and child arriving unexpectedly with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the meager provisions Takoda had provided. And accompanied by a Cheyenne, no less. Would that help or hinder their welcome? She needn't have worried. Their arrival was noted almost immediately by a woman sweeping snow from the trading post porch. A tall, sturdy figure wrapped in a practical wool coat, her grey-streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun. Upon seeing Takoda, she raised a hand in greeting, then paused, noticing his companions with evident surprise. As they approached the trading post, the woman set aside her broom and stepped forward to meet them. Her face was weathered but handsome, with clear blue eyes that missed nothing as she assessed the newcomers. Takoda, she greeted, her voice carrying the faint lilt of a Scandinavian heritage. Didn't expect to see you until spring thaw. Widow Larson, Takoda returned with a respectful nod. The storm brought unexpected visitors to my cabin. The woman's gaze shifted to Sarah and Emma, her expression curious but not unwelcoming. I can see that. And who might you be, finding yourself in these mountains during winter? Sarah stepped forward, summoning her courage. Sarah Mitchell, ma'am. This is my daughter, Emma. We were trying to reach Eagle's Crossing when the blizzard caught us. Takoda saved our lives. Did he now? Widow Larson's eyebrows rose slightly, though she didn't seem particularly surprised by Takoda's intervention. Well, that's a story worth hearing. She glanced at Emma, noting the child's evident fatigue, despite her valiant attempts to stand straight. But not before you've had a proper meal and rest, I'd wager. Come inside, both of you. She turned toward the trading post door, then paused, looking back at Takoda, who had remained where he stood, making no move to follow. You too, Takoda, she added firmly. I've got coffee hot on the stove, and you look like you could use some before heading back. A flicker of something like surprise crossed Takoda's normally impassive features before he nodded in acceptance. Sarah realized that he had expected to deliver them safely to River's Bend and then depart immediately, that being invited inside the trading post was not a courtesy he typically received. The interior of the trading post was warm and well organized, with shelves of goods along the walls, a pot-bellied stove radiating heat from one corner, and a counter at the back that appeared to serve as both sales area and Widow Larson's personal domain. A door behind the counter presumably led to private quarters. Sit, Widow Larson directed, gesturing to a small table near the stove. I'll fetch that coffee and something to eat. You look half frozen, child, she added to Emma with unexpected gentleness. As the woman bustled about, preparing coffee and assembling a plate of bread, cheese, and dried fruit, Sarah took in their surroundings with growing hope. The trading post was well stocked and prosperous looking, indicating a healthy local economy. If there was work to be had here, perhaps their prospects weren't as dire as she had feared. Widow Larson returned with the promised refreshments, setting them on the table before pulling up a chair to join them. Now, she said briskly, tell me how a woman and child found themselves caught in a blizzard in the high country. Sarah hesitated, unsure how much of her situation to reveal to this stranger, but something in Widow Larson's direct gaze encouraged honesty, and Sarah found herself relating the whole story: Robert's death, Daniel's betrayal, their desperate attempt to reach Eagle's Crossing, and finally, Dakota's timely rescue. The older woman listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grim as the tale unfolded. When Sarah finished, Widow Larson shook her head in disgust. "Some people have no Christian charity in their souls," she declared. "Turning out family in winter, and with a child no less. Your brother-in-law will answer for that someday, mark my words." "He is not the first to value land above life," Dakota observed quietly from his place at the table. Widow Larson acknowledged this with a nod. Sad truth that. She turned her attention back to Sarah. "And now? What are your plans?" Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I was a schoolteacher before I married. I can read, write, keep accounts. Dakota mentioned you might. That is, he thought perhaps you needed help with correspondence, record keeping." A spark of interest lit Widow Larson's eyes. "Did he now?" She glanced at Dakota with something that might have been approval. "Well, he's not wrong. These old eyes aren't what they used to be, and the shipping manifests from back east might as well be written in Greek, for all I can make out sometimes." Hope surged in Sarah's chest. "I'm a quick learner, ma'am, and I'm willing to do other work as well, cleaning, cooking, whatever's needed." Widow Larson studied her thoughtfully. "We'll talk terms later. First things first, you and the little one need proper rest. There's a small cabin behind the trading post. My son used it before he moved to his own place upriver. It's basic but sound, with a good stove and a bed. You're welcome to it until we sort out something more permanent." Sarah blinked back sudden tears. "That's very generous, Mrs. Larson. I don't know how to thank you." "Agnes," the older woman corrected. "Everyone calls me Agnes, and you can thank me by helping me make sense of the spring inventory when it arrives." She rose from the table with brisk efficiency. "Finish your coffee, then I'll show you the cabin. Dakota, you're welcome to stay the night as well. Storm clouds are building again, and it's a long walk back to your place." Dakota shook his head. "I should return before dark. Grey Wolf waits." Agnes looked as if she might argue, but instead nodded in acceptance of his decision. "At least take some supplies for your trouble. Coffee, sugar. I've got fresh tobacco in from the last shipment." "No payment needed," Dakota said firmly. "It's not payment," Agnes countered. "It's thanks. There's a difference." Something passed. Between them, a moment of mutual respect built on prior interactions. Finally, Dakota inclined his head in agreement. After they had finished their refreshments, Agnes led them outside and around to the back of the trading post, where a small but well-maintained cabin stood. It was indeed basic. A single room with a stove, a bed, a table with 2 chairs, and little else. But it was clean, solid, and blessedly warm once Agnes lit the fire that had been laid in the stove. "It's not fancy," Agnes acknowledged as they surveyed the space, "but it'll keep out the cold." "It's perfect," Sarah assured her, already envisioning how they could make this simple shelter into a home, however temporary. Emma had immediately claimed the bed, running her hand over the patchwork quilt that covered it with appreciative wonder. After sleeping on the ground and then on Dakota's sleeping platform, a real bed seemed the height of luxury. "Get settled." "In," Agnes instructed. "Rest today. Tomorrow we'll talk about work and introduce you around to folks. People here are decent. They'll help you get established." With that reassurance, she departed, leaving Sarah and Emma alone in what would be their new home, at least for now. The reality of their changed circumstances began to sink in. They had survived. They had found shelter, potential work, and what appeared to be a welcoming community. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was no longer the desperate flight from certain death it had been just days ago. With Emma happily exploring their new quarters, Sarah stepped outside to where Takoda waited. He had declined to enter the cabin, perhaps feeling it was a space that should be theirs alone to claim. "I don't know how to thank you," Sarah said, facing him in the fading afternoon light. "For our lives, for bringing us here, for everything." Takoda regarded her steadily. "I told you before, no thanks needed between people who have shared fire and food." "Even so," Sarah persisted, "we would have died in that storm without you." Perhaps," Takoda acknowledged. "Or perhaps you would have found another path. The strong survive, and you are strong, Sarah Mitchell." The use of her full name carried a formality that signaled parting. Sarah felt an unexpected pang at the realization that Takoda was leaving, that this unlikely connection forged in crisis was about to be severed. "Will we see you again?" she asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. Of course, they would. River's Bend was his trading destination, as he'd mentioned. "When the snow melts," Takoda confirmed, "I bring furs, meat to trade, sometimes medicinal plants that Agnes sells to settlers." "Emma will be glad," Sarah said, glancing back toward the cabin where her daughter was visible through the window, arranging her few possessions on the small table. "She's grown quite attached to you, and to Grey Wolf." A ghost of a smile touched Takoda's lips. "Children see clearly before they learn to look away." The simple observation carried profound truth. Sarah hoped that Emma would never learn to look away, to judge people based on appearance or heritage rather than character and actions. "I hope you'll visit us when you come," she said. "Our door will always be open to you." Takoda studied her face, as if searching for something. Beyond her words, whatever he saw seemed to satisfy him, for he nodded once, accepting the invitation. "The winter will pass," he said. "Spring always returns." It was both observation and promise, a reminder that all seasons, even the harshest, eventually yield to renewal. Sarah took comfort in the metaphor. "Safe journey back," she said, knowing there was little else to say that wouldn't sound inadequate against the magnitude of what they had shared. Takoda inclined his head in acknowledgement, then turned to go. Sarah watched him walk away, his tall figure soon disappearing among the buildings of River's Bend as he headed back toward the forest edge where Grey Wolf waited. Inside the cabin, Emma called for her, excitement in her voice as she discovered some forgotten treasure left by the previous occupant. Sarah turned back toward their new shelter, their new beginning. One chapter had ended, another was just beginning to unfold. The following days passed in a whirl of activity as Sarah and Emma settled into life at River's Bend. Agnes Larson proved to be as good as her word, providing work for Sarah in the trading post. Initially simple tasks like organizing inventory and cleaning, but quickly progressing to more complex responsibilities as Sarah demonstrated her abilities with figures and correspondence. The community, while initially curious about the newcomers, welcomed them with practical frontier hospitality. The blacksmith's wife, Martha Simmons, arrived their second day with a basket of food and hand-me-down clothing for Emma from her own daughters. The trapper, Jackson Reed, whose cabin stood near the creek at the edge of the settlement, brought a load of firewood and split it himself, refusing payment with gruff embarrassment. Emma, resilient as only children can be, adapted quickly to their new circumstances. Within days, she was playing with the other children of the settlement, building snow forts with the blacksmith's daughters, and learning to identify animal tracks with Jackson Reed's son, a serious boy named Thomas, who shared his father's affinity for wilderness lore. By the end of their first week, Sarah had begun transforming their modest cabin into something resembling a home. Cast-off furniture appeared with surprising regularity, a rocking chair from the Miller's family, a small bookshelf from Agnes's own quarters, cooking utensils from various households. Each gift came with the same explanation. "We had this extra," or "this was just gathering dust." Proud frontier folks maintaining the fiction that charity played no role in their generosity. Agnes proved to be not just an employer, but a mentor of sorts, teaching Sarah the intricacies of frontier commerce while benefiting from Sarah's more formal education. When Sarah suggested implementing a more organized bookkeeping system for the trading post, Agnes embraced the idea with enthusiasm, recognizing the value it would bring to her business. "You've got a good head for figures," Agnes observed one evening as they reviewed the day's transactions. "Better than most men I've met, truth be told." It was high praise from a woman not given to empty compliments. Sarah found herself valuing Agnes's approval more than she would have expected. "My father believed girls should be educated as thoroughly as boys," Sarah explained. "He was considered quite radical in our town." "Smart man," Agnes replied with a nod of approval. "My Henrik was the same way. Insisted our daughter learn to read contracts before she was 12. Saved her from a bad marriage later, being able to read the fine print herself." The casual revelation of a daughter was new information. Sarah had met Agnes's son, Carl, a quiet man who managed the small lumber operation upriver, but there had been no mention of a daughter. "Does your daughter live nearby?" Sarah asked, curious about the family dynamics. Agnes's expression softened slightly. "Ingrid's in Denver now. Married a lawyer, has 3 children of her own." There was pride in her voice, but also a hint of old pain. "We don't see each other often. The mountains make visiting difficult, especially in winter." Sarah understood the unspoken reality, that Agnes had chosen to remain in this remote settlement rather than follow her daughter to the comforts of city life, just as her daughter had chosen to leave rather than remain in River's Bend. Such were the hard choices faced by pioneer families. As February gave way to March, the first subtle signs of spring's approach began to appear. The days grew incrementally longer, the sun's warmth more pronounced during midday hours. Patches of ground emerged from beneath the snow cover, and the river's ice began to fragment along the edges. With the changing season came increased activity in River's Bend. Trappers who had wintered in distant cabins began to appear with their harvests of furs. Traders from larger settlements occasionally braved the still difficult trails to bring news and the promise of spring shipments to come. Sarah found herself watching for Takoda with an anticipation that surprised her. She told herself it was simply for Emma's sake. The child asked about him regularly, wondering when he and Grey Wolf would visit as promised. But Sarah knew her own interest went deeper. Takoda had become something more than simply their rescuer. He represented a wisdom and perspective that challenged her previous understanding of the world. Emma, meanwhile, had flourished in their new environment. The initial trauma of their ordeal seemed to have faded, replaced by the resilience children often demonstrate when provided with security and routine. She had made friends, particularly with Thomas Reed, the trapper's son, who shared her fascination with wildlife and forest lore. "Thomas says Takoda taught his father how to make special snowshoes," Emma reported one evening, as Sarah prepared their supper. "The kind that don't sink in deep snow." "Did he now?" Sarah replied, unsurprised by this additional evidence of Takoda's influence in the community. "That was generous of him," Emma nodded seriously. "Thomas says his father trades with Takoda every spring, says he's the best hunter in the mountains." These little insights into Takoda's relationships with the people of River's Bend painted a picture of a man who, while not fully integrated into settler society, had nonetheless established a place for himself through skill, integrity, and selective sharing of his knowledge. It was early April when Sarah, working in the trading post, glanced up to see a familiar figure approaching. from the direction of the forest. Takoda walked with the same measured stride she remembered, a pack on his back and a bundle of furs carried over one shoulder. At his side, padded Grey Wolf, maintaining a wary distance from the settlement, but clearly unwilling to remain behind this time. Sarah felt her heart quicken at the sight. Without thinking, she stepped out onto the porch, raising a hand in greeting. Takoda paused, then altered his course slightly to approach the trading post directly, rather than circling to the back entrance, where trappers typically brought their goods. "Takoda," she said as he drew near, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "We've been hoping you'd come soon." He studied her face, his own expression revealing nothing yet somehow conveying assessment. "The ice has broken on the high streams," he said. "Spring comes." It was such a Takoda-like greeting, factual, tied to the natural world, yet carrying deeper meaning. Spring indeed had come, not just to the land, but to their lives, bringing renewal after a season of hardship. "Emma will be thrilled to see you," Sarah told him. "She's at the schoolhouse now. We started lessons last month." This last was shared with quiet pride. The settlement had no formal school, but when Sarah's background in education became known, several families had requested she teach their children. Agnes had readily adjusted Sarah's working hours to accommodate this new role. "You have found your place here," Takoda observed, and though his tone remained neutral, Sarah sensed approval. "Thanks to you," she acknowledged. "Your guidance led us to safety in more ways than one." Takoda shook his head slightly. "I showed a path. You walked it with courage." Before Sarah could respond, the trading post door opened behind her, and Agnes emerged, her face lighting with recognition at the sight of their visitor. "Well, look who the spring thaws brought us," she said warmly. "Got something worth trading. This year, Takoda?" He nodded, indicating the furs he carried. "Beaver mostly. Some fox, one silver wolf, taken cleanly." "Quality as always, I expect," Agnes said with approval. "Come round back and we'll see what's fair. Sarah, mind the counter while we conduct our business?" Sarah nodded her agreement, exchanging one last look with Takoda before he followed Agnes around to the trading entrance. Grey Wolf remained where he was, settling onto his haunches at a respectful distance from the building, amber eyes watchful. When Emma returned from her lessons later that afternoon, her reaction to Takoda's arrival was everything Sarah had anticipated, pure joy mingled with excited vindication that he had kept his promise. She flew to greet Grey Wolf first, who remembered her with a gentle nudge of his massive head against her outstretched hand. "You came back!" Emma exclaimed when Takoda emerged from the trading post, his business with Agnes apparently concluded. "I knew you would when the snow melted." Takoda acknowledged her enthusiasm with a slight nod, though Sarah detected a softening around his eyes that he reserved for children. "I said I would." "Did you bring Grey Wolf just for me?" Emma asked, her hand still resting on the wolf dog's thick fur. "He remembered you," Takoda answered simply. "Wanted to see if you remembered him." Emma beamed at this, clearly interpreting it as a special honor. "I've been practicing my tracking like you showed me," she informed him seriously. "Thomas and I found deer prints by the creek yesterday, and rabbit trails near the schoolhouse." "Good," Takoda approved. "The land speaks to those who listen." Sarah watched their interaction with a full heart, struck by how naturally Takoda communicated with her daughter. How he spoke to Emma as a person worthy of respect rather than merely a child to be indulged. It was one of the qualities that had first drawn Sarah's trust during those desperate days in his cabin. That evening, at Sarah's insistence and with Agnes's hearty endorsement, Takoda joined them for supper in their small cabin. It was a simple meal, rabbit stew with wild onions and the first spring greens, complemented by bread Sarah had baked that morning, but shared in an atmosphere of genuine warmth. Emma dominated the conversation, eager to tell Dakota about all she had experienced since their arrival in River's Bend. She spoke of her new friends, her lessons with Sarah and the other children, the spring birds that had begun to return to the settlement. Dakota listened with the same attentive patience he had shown in his cabin, offering occasional observations or gentle corrections when Emma's enthusiastic reports strayed into exaggeration. When Emma finally exhausted her stories and the meal was finished, Sarah expected Dakota to take his leave. Instead, he reached into the leather bag he carried, withdrawing a small object wrapped in soft hide. "For you," he said to Emma, extending the package, "to remember the mountains." Emma accepted the gift with reverent hands, carefully unwrapping. The hide to reveal a small carved figure, a wolf sitting upright, head tilted slightly as if listening. The craftsmanship was exquisite, capturing Grey Wolf's essence in a few deceptively simple cuts in the pale wood. "It's beautiful," Emma breathed, turning the carving to examine it from all angles. "It looks just like him." Dakota nodded, pleased by her appreciation. "The wood is aspen, light like bone, but strong in its own way." "Thank you," Emma said, clutching the carving to her chest. "I'll keep it forever." After Emma had been put to bed, her new treasure placed carefully on the small shelf beside her, Sarah and Dakota stepped outside into the cool spring evening. The air held the lingering crispness of winter, but was softened by the promise of warming days to come. Stars pricked the clear sky, their light reflecting off the remaining patches of snow. "Will you stay in River's Bend tonight?" Sarah asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Dakota shook his head. "There is a place I camp, not far. I prefer the open sky." Sarah nodded, understanding his preference for space and solitude after a day of necessary interaction with the settlement. "How long will you remain in the area?" "A few days," he replied. "There are plants beginning to emerge that Agnes values for her medicines. I will gather them before returning to the high country." The knowledge that he would not immediately disappear back into the wilderness brought Sarah a sense of relief she hadn't realized she was waiting for. "Emma would love to see more of Grey Wolf if that's possible." Dakota studied her face in the starlight, his expression thoughtful. "And you, Sarah Mitchell, what would you love?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. In the month since Robert's death, no one had asked what she wanted, only what she needed, what would sustain her and Emma through crisis and beyond. The very idea that she might desire something for herself seemed almost foreign. "To thank you properly," she answered finally, "for saving us, for showing us the way here." She hesitated, then added more softly, "For seeing strength in me when I wasn't sure it existed." Dakota was silent for a long moment, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "There is an old saying among my people," he said finally. "The gift is in the giving. What you see as debt, I see as honor. The circle is complete. No more thanks are needed." There was a finality to his words that both reassured and saddened Sarah. He was releasing her from any sense of obligation, making it clear that their paths, having intersected in crisis, could now diverge without regret or unfinished business. Yet something in her rebelled against this neat conclusion. The connection between them felt unresolved, pregnant with possibilities neither had acknowledged. "Will you visit again?" she asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple wording suggested. "When you come to trade, I mean..." Dakota seemed to consider his answer carefully. "The trading seasons will bring me to River's Bend," he said, 4 times each year as the world turns. It was neither promise nor rejection, simply a statement of the pattern his life followed, leaving the question of deeper connection open to interpretation. Sarah nodded, accepting the ambiguity as perhaps the only honest answer possible in their complicated circumstances. "Our door will always be open to you," she said, repeating the invitation she had extended on their first day in River's Bend. Takoda inclined his head in acknowledgement. "And my fire will always welcome you and the child should you ever walk the high trails again." It was as much commitment as either could offer, the assurance of continued connection without demanding definition or imposing expectations. For now, it was enough. They parted soon after, Takoda disappearing into the gathering darkness with Grey Wolf at his side, Sarah returning to the warm cabin where Emma slept peacefully, the carved wolf watching over her dreams. Standing by the window, Sarah gazed out at the star-filled sky, thinking of all that had transpired since that desperate day when Daniel had turned them away from what should have been sanctuary. The journey had been harder than anything she could have imagined, bringing them to the edge of death itself. Yet here they stood, not merely surviving, but beginning to thrive in this new community that had welcomed them despite their arrival. With empty hands, Emma was happy, making friends and learning both in the informal schoolroom and from the practical wisdom of frontier life. Sarah herself had found not just employment, but purpose, her skills valued and her contributions recognized. And woven through it all was the unlikely thread of connection to Takoda, the man who had saved them from the storm and shown them a path forward both literally and figuratively. Whatever the future held, whatever form their ongoing relationship might take, Sarah knew with certainty that her life and Emma's had been forever changed by his intervention. Outside, a wolf's howl rose from the forest edge. Grey Wolf calling to the night perhaps, or to some wild kin in the distant mountains. The sound carried no menace now, only a reminder of the wilderness from which they had emerged, transformed but unbroken. Sarah touched the small wooden beaver Takoda had carved for her, which now sat on the mantel above their stove. "The beaver does not leave when winter comes," he had told her. "It prepares, builds stronger, finds ways to survive where it is." She had found her place to build, to strengthen, to survive. Not where she had expected, not through paths she would have chosen, but perhaps exactly where she needed to be. The winter of grief and loss would never fully leave her. But spring had come at last, bringing new growth and possibilities she had not dared to imagine. Emma stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about wolves and mountains. Sarah smiled, tucking the blanket more securely around her daughter's shoulders. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys. For tonight, it was enough to know they were safe, they were warm, and they were no longer alone. The story of the widowed mother left to freeze had become something else entirely, a tale of rescue, resilience, and renewal against the backdrop of the unforgiving Montana wilderness. And somewhere in the starlit forest, a Cheyenne hunter and his wolf dog made their way back to a solitary camp, carrying with them the knowledge that they too were no longer truly alone in the world. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.